welcome in. It is Big Ten Today on a Wednesday. We are presented by Rally House. Great to have you with us. I'm Dave Revson. We start to turn the page, looking ahead a bit to week 2 in the Big Ten today. And there's literally no one on planet Earth I would rather do that with than Jerry DiNardo, who joins me now. And Coach, the level of difficulty ramping up a little bit for some Big Ten teams this week.
It does, and it should. I mean, this is the way you want to get ready for conference play. So even some teams are playing, like Iowa's playing Iowa State. It's a non-conference rival. To me, I always look at that as they play 10 conference games, right? Michigan State's playing Boston College. That's like playing 10 conference games. So we have some really tough opponents that, you know, maybe you didn't really want to put on your schedule before they went to 9 games.
Well, those marquee opponents are part of our big story, which is presented by Rally House. It is those games against the power conference foes. 5-0 for the Big Ten in week 2. There were just 3 in week 1. 3 of those games are on the road. Illinois going to Duke. The one Jerry was just talking about, Iowa and Ames to battle the Cyclones. Marquee game of the weekend is number 15 Michigan visiting 18th ranked Oklahoma. And so, Jerry, let's start with the Wolverines. As I mentioned, we're going to hear from Sherrone more coming up a little bit later in the show. Sat down with Ashley Adamson. But what did you learn about the Wolverines in week 1?
Okay, going into the season, I think Sherrone Moore had 2 issues that he had to solve. One was the pass game, but really the entire offensive scheme. And the other thing was obviously the quarterback to run that scheme. So let's start with the coach. Sherrone hired Chip Lindsey, who I have followed when he was at Auburn back in the day, and then he became the head coach of Troy in Alabama. I think that he is one of the best offensive coordinators and play callers there is. So I think that was a great hire, and I think it'll unfold that way. And then obviously Bryce Underwood. We watched him at camp, Rever. Great physical tools, but really accurate, really poised for a great season for a freshman. Now, you know, you're going to Oklahoma, and I could anticipate perhaps the offense not getting off to that fast a start because it's much different than a non-conference game. It's not an SEC school. But Wink Martindale's defense will give them time. And funny, when we were at camp is all the offensive coaches were saying is, we go against this defense every day. I mean, this is getting old. So even if they get a slow start at Oklahoma, I think Wink Martindale's defense will keep them in the game. And then Bryce Underwood and Chip Lindsey and everybody involved with the offense will get it going at the right time.
Well, it should be a really good quarterback battle. John Mateer was fabulous in Oklahoma's opener. Amazingly, just the second time these two powerhouses have ever met. The other one, the 1976 Orange Bowl. So that's the story with one of the power conference teams from the state of Oklahoma. The other one, Oklahoma State, will be in Eugene. They will take on Oregon. Oklahoma State 1-0 after beating UT Martin last week. And Mike Gundy has spent a lot of time this week talking about the financial inequities between the two programs. He drew a contrast between how much more Oregon spent in NIL, citing Nike money, and how much Oklahoma State spent. Went on to say, quote, non-conference scheduling, and I never thought anybody would ever say this, should be based on the financial situation for each school. Oregon's paying a lot of money for their team. From a non-conference standpoint, there's coaches saying they should play teams that are spending the same amount of money. Here's how Dan Lanning responded.
I got a ton of respect for Coach Gundy. Ultimately, how blessed are we to be in a place that's invested in winning? If you want to be a top 10 team in college football, you better be invested in winning. And we spend to win. Some people save to have an excuse for why they don't, right? And ultimately, he's a great coach. They've done an unbelievable job, but I want to be a team that's competing at the highest level. And we're really fortunate to be in that situation. So I can't speak on their situation. I have no idea, what they got in their pockets over there. I'm sure UT Martin maybe didn't have as much as them last week, and they played. So we'll let it play out.
Yeah, it's not totally worth getting into the fray here, but Lanning makes a great point. I mean, obviously there were significant inequities between what Oklahoma State has and UT Martin has, and there are games like that all the time. It is interesting, I think, to point out, and again, I think you have to take Mike Gundy at face value, as no one knows what they spent better than Mike Gundy, but we are talking about a program that had one of the great financial benefactors of all time in T. Boone Pickens, who gave Oklahoma State more than $300 million for athletics in his lifetime, so hardly an impoverished program. But that being said, again, I don't know what's going on there in recent years, but what do you make of all this, Jerry?
I think Mike Gundy is a really good coach. I mean, he has done really good things at Oklahoma State, but it is true that his hobby is to complain about money. And when I was involved with the Oklahoma State with the previous athletic director when I was doing some search work, and there was always an issue with Mike Gundy and money. So this isn't new for him. I have to say this, though. Okay, so I started with college football in 1971 in one form or another to this day. And to me, the haves, the teams that have won most of the national championships, the teams that have the best talent, the biggest budgets, I haven't seen anything that's going to change that. I would say that Mike Gundy's place and Oklahoma's place in college football has not changed for the last 30 years. They're a good program. They're not Oklahoma. They're not Texas. I mean, you can spin it any way you want. But I don't think the finances are going to move the needle up or down for Mike Gundy, because I think that they are in a place that they will always be. And now I'm not saying they can't win a national championship once in a while, but when you talk about the great powers in college football, Oklahoma State has not been one of them. And I can't think in my lifetime someone that has not been a have becoming a have. You could have a great year, but year in and year out, the teams that have won the national championships will always continue to win the national championships.
And again, this feels like an issue to bring up with your athletic director and not necessarily to air for the entire country. But again, as you said, he's had incredible success there and can talk about what he wants to talk about when he gets the media opportunities. That said, I'm interested in diving into the game a little bit with you. We got to see Dante Moore make his debut as the starter for Oregon. What did you take out of week one?
Yeah, I think Dante Moore is going to get better every week. The one thing, and I mentioned this last week when we were together, so impressed with Will Stein, the offensive coordinator at Oregon, being in his quarterback meetings, being in his unit meetings. Their offense is going to steadily improve. I have found this, though. In recent years, you've seen offensive lines that have been divided by style. By that, I mean we have offensive lines that are zone blocking, not really all that physical. And then we have offensive lines and programs that are double teaming. They're running some option. They're running some counter. They're running gap schemes. And I would put Oregon in that category of the real physical offensive line. And it's not only the athletic ability of the offensive line, it's the scheme. So I think that Oregon will go into every game with a run game that'll challenge the defense, because they're going to be downhill and they're going to be a tough outfit to stop.
Exactly 253 yards, both rushing and passing last week. They did not allow a single negative play, that offensive line. What about Illinois? They're now up to number 11. They head down to Durham, take on Manny Diaz and Duke. Blue Devils had a really nice year last year. They won 9 games. This feels to me, Jerry, like a really good measuring stick game for the Illini.
I've been talking about this game since the summer, right, when all the magazines come out, but and here's why. With all the hype about Illinois, they won 10 games last year. They have their head coach back, their offensive coordinator back, their defensive coordinator, their quarterback. All things point the arrow up. They're talking about, a lot of people talk about them being college football playoff, and I don't see any reason they can't. But the players had to deal with the hype, and I kept saying the Duke game will be some indication if they're dealing with the hype the right way. Now, I think the win against Western Illinois was good. I mean, I'd say the only thing that jumps out at, they had 60 yards of penalties. That's too much. But they won the time of possession, which isn't a big deal, but it's a big deal for Brett Bielema because of the way he manages the game. So that was good. There was no turnovers. I mean, they really were efficient against Western Illinois. But this Duke game will tell us much more than Western Illinois. They're going to be on the road. Manny Diaz was at Penn State. Manny Diaz knows how tough a program this Illinois team is, and he will share that, obviously, with his team. So I can't wait for this one to happen, because I think it's going to give us a real indication if the Illinois team buys into the 1-0 philosophy of Brett Bielema. I certainly believe they do, but this will be an indication that they do.
And we know how good Manny Diaz is with his defense. Illinois did give up 3 sacks in the opener, Jerry, against Western Illinois. I worry a little bit about that and the offensive line going down to Durham. But to your point, should be a really good game, although Duke didn't play great in its opener. They were tied with Elon at the half, ended up pulling away in the second half. But again, really good measuring stick game there. What about Iowa and Iowa State? Kirk Ferentz, we know the story here. He is going for history. With a win here, he becomes the winningest coach at a Big Ten school in the history of the conference. He passed Woody Hayes at Ohio State. But, man, I mean, we already know, you were talking at the top of the show about the intensity of this rivalry. Iowa State is really good. This is a rare occasion where Iowa State is the ranked team and Iowa is the unranked team. So what do you make of the challenge ahead for Kirk this week?
Yeah, I mean, Kirk's going to eventually break your record, and whenever he does, he's going to be known as one of the great coaches in the history of the sport. And so, if it doesn't happen this week, it's eventually going to happen. It's when it happens isn't important. The fact that it's going to happen is going to make him one of the great all-time coaches. Okay, so the problem going into the season obviously was the pass game. I mean, this has been Iowa's problem. They rushed for over 300 yards last week. The pass game with Mark Gronowski at quarterback didn't really look very good in the pocket situations and in the play action situations, but it looked very good in the RPO game. And the RPO game is before the ball snapped, the players don't know whether it's a run or pass. It's run, pass option, depending on the alignment of the defense. When we pass in an RPO, that means there's a lot of people in the box and you have one-on-one coverage. When Gronowski was faced with that, he was very efficient. So it makes sense to me if they rush for 300 yards and the RPO was the best part of the pass game, that's where they're going to live in the pass game as they develop the pocket game and the play action. They've got to get better in the pocket and the play action game, but they are really good at the RPO game. And I would suggest to you that that's what we're going to see at Ames. But again, this is like playing 10 conference games. Every year, Iowa plays Iowa State. It's a non-conference rival, and this is a significant game that you've got to prepare for. And it's probably the toughest non-conference rival in the conference.
To your point, I mean, Iowa's won 20 of its last 22 games against non-conference opponents. The 2 losses, both against Iowa State. And I mentioned how unusual this is. It's just the second time ever that an unranked Iowa team has played a ranked Iowa State team. The other was 1978. Finally, when we're talking about these power conference matchups, Jerry, I want to talk a little bit about Michigan State and Boston College. This was a narrow loss for MSU on the road last year against the Eagles. They get a chance to kind of atone for that here in East Lansing. What are you interested in seeing from Michigan State as they work off of that Week 1 win?
Yeah, just continuing. Aiden Childs, to me, the improvement he made from last year to last week's game is just incredible. And I think the offensive coaches have done a great job of building that offense around Childs, and it shows. They're running some RPOs, which is where he's really good. But he can make all the other throws. He threw a couple deep routes. He threw a inside curl route that was in the soft part of the coverage. He's really been impressive. He's not much of a scrambler. He doesn't really threaten the defense with his legs. But this is a much improved Michigan State. I wasn't at their camp, Reverend. I know you were, but to me, watching the game, which I'd be interested in your opinion, what you thought when you were there. The offensive line looks much improved, and they look like they're deeper and better than they were, much better than they were a year ago. But Aiden Childs, he stole the show for me in the first game.
Right. I would say the biggest takeaways when we were there were the offensive line clearly was deeper and that they had added weapons at wide receiver, and we certainly saw evidence of that in the game. They weren't as reliant on Nick Marsh as they were last year. And then the other thing, Jerry, you know, Joe Rossi kept telling me, I think we're going to do better affecting the quarterback than we did last year. And remember, they went that stretch of 6 games without a sack last season. I thought the defense was really good in this game. Frankly, the offense kind of faded away in the second half. They didn't do anything. They didn't score a single offensive point. But Joe Rossi's defense carried the show.
Yeah, the two things I want to mention: Brian Lindgren, the offensive coordinator, and John Boyer, the quarterback coach, did a tremendous job. But here's the deal with Joe Rossi. Here's I think the way you want to manage. I think Joe, go to your bat cave. If you have some problems, come out and let us know. But we're gonna get better on offense, and we're gonna become more balanced on offense because Joe Rossi will have that defense ready every game.
217 yards allowed in that game. That was the fewest against an FBS opponent in 6 years. So really good start for that D. Again, BC will be a bigger challenge, no doubt, for the Spartans. Back on Big Ten today, and as we mentioned, Michigan 1-0 after taking down New Mexico. Wolverines' fourth straight win back to last season. The level of difficulty does ramp up Saturday in Norman to take on Oklahoma. As I mentioned, just the second ever meeting between these two, but they will play next year as well in Ann Arbor. Sherrone Moore going back to his alma mater, talking it through with Ashley Adamson. It is today's big interview.
Coach, it's great to be with you. First and foremost, obviously, congratulations on the season opening win against New Mexico. I know that you have fully turned the page to week 2, but to look back really quickly, when you review that film and you watched it, what was something that stood out to you that maybe you didn't see in real time during the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that you saw was constant communication between our players, how they, attacked the process all week is how it looked on the film. Both sides of the ball and in special teams felt like they played extremely hard. They played extremely physical. We really talked about trust, just trusting the process and trusting what they, how they train and what they've done to this point. And really the biggest 3 goals on offense was no turnovers. Defense, special team was tackling well, and then consistent energy. And I thought in all 3 phases they did that.
I think about Bryce Underwood and, his first career start. There was so much excitement to see him actually play a game. I know you've seen him make all of those plays in practice, maybe other than the block, but what was the moment that really stood out to you when you saw him be able to show up and just play like how he knows how to play?
Yeah, I mean, probably a couple. The first moment where I really thought about him and just understood like how bought in he is was the block he had in the low red zone. And he's bought into the culture, and you think a guy that was ranked the #1 player in the country and been so physical and physically imposing, and a guy that has so much going for him, and people talk about, the last thing he'd want to do is go block somebody. He'd keep his body out the way. But the guy is just he's a team player. He wants to be about the team. And he's going to do anything for the team to be successful. So I think that was the first one. And then probably the second one was that 3rd and 14 throw that he made in 2 minutes. Yeah, I thought, just a great job by Coach Lindsey on the call and just the trust in him to make the play. But it was an incredible throw. It was a tight window. And for him and Channing Goodwin to be on the same page and make that play, it was impressive for that 2-minute drive and then go down and score eventually. So showed great poise, showed an ability to push the ball down the field, obviously, but really manage the offense and be a leader on the offense.
Yeah, that 2-minute drill was impressive. He did not look like a freshman out there. I do have to ask though, when we saw it, but when he threw that block that sprung Justice Haynes, what did you say to him when he came to the sideline?
Oh, you got to stop that. I don't need you to do that anymore. But I think the players really loved seeing it. I heard a lot of noise from the defense and how happy they were, and you heard ooh from the crowd. And it wasn't even an ooh of any blocks in the offensive line. It was the block of the quarterback. So the kid he's all in, and he's going to do whatever it takes to win.
I love it. All right. So one game into, you mentioned Chip Lindsey, your new offensive coordinator, one game into him, calling plays. What stood out most, or what did you like the most about the way the offense was operating?
I thought he just such great rhythm. He understands how to attack defenses, what to do, and how to get his quarterback in rhythm, how to get his team in rhythm. And he calls it with such great flow and understands how to do it. He's done it for a long time. And just such a fair mix of under center, shotgun, play action, run the ball, spread, tempo, like all those things, exactly what we want to be. You saw a good mix of that, and it was awesome to be a part of.
I want to ask about your defense real quick before we move on to this upcoming Saturday. At Media Day, I remember the last question we asked you was, who's the guy that no one's talking about enough? Mm-hmm. And you didn't hesitate. You immediately said Cole Sullivan, your linebacker with just a freaky athlete. I smiled when I saw him get that late interception on Saturday. What was your reaction? That did not look like a linebacker going up and getting that ball.
He's a freak athlete, and he's a guy that we've seen this over and over again. You see how he works, what he does, his thought process and how he prepares. I literally just saw him a little bit ago, and he's just always all smiles. He attacks everything, but he's like 6'5". He's 230 something plus pounds, maybe 240. I don't know what he runs, but he runs fast. And he's playing inside linebacker, but then we got him on the edge doing things, and he's got I think he's over 30 something inch vertical, maybe 35 or something like that. But the kid's an absolute freak show, and he just keeps getting better and better. And he's young. He's really young
Yeah.
for.
Well, linebacker depth obviously will be key this weekend. Jayshon Barham will miss the first half of the game against Oklahoma for the targeting call, in the second half of the New Mexico game. You've come out and you've said your piece on just the NCAA denying the appeal. What is it that you want them to look at? Because I think there's two parts of this. There's the actual call, and then there's the consequence of missing the first half of the next game.
Yeah, I think you look at, and if you go back to even when we played in 23, JJ was hit helmet to helmet, and the guy launched and hit him. That was overturned later on. The NCAA actually pulled that back, and you compare the hits, they were completely different. Jay Sean goes in there, and it's really not about the head. It's what he was doing when he was hitting, and when he was hitting the defender, he tried to turn his head and get away from the guy. So just want consistency. That's all we want is if you're going to make that call, then all across college football, that call should be that way. But then we got to figure out how do we want our guys to tackle? How do you want them to tackle when they're getting off a block? Because, even as an offensive coach, I've seen guys get off of blocks, and what are you telling the defensive guy to do? Because if he lowers his head at that point, it's probably going to be a worse hit. And, just got to be consistent. But we know as an organization now that it's over, and we got to keep rolling. We got to keep playing and have a plan for this week, and we will.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this week. You obviously returned to Norman, Oklahoma, where you played. There has been plenty of people like me asking questions about this, and you've been very clear that this game is not about you. It's about your players.
Yep.
I am curious, though, you have a unique insight into what that environment and what that program is all about. Have you talked to your guys, or will you talk to your guys about your experience there?
Yeah, I think the thing I'll just tell them about is that it's a great town, it's a great place. Obviously we have some guys that are young that haven't played in loud stadiums yet, which is okay. They'll be excited about it. And the number one thing I am trying to do is just make sure that we're ready to play. And at the end of the day, the crowd's not playing in the game. It's the 11 players on the opposite side, whether it's offense, defense, special teams. So we're just going to concentrate on that piece and not let anything else distract us.
Is there anything you can do to get, especially Bryce Underwood, ready for what that noise actually will be like? Is there enough crowd noise you could even pump in during practice to emulate it?
Yeah, we do a pretty good job of pumping in crowd noise, and we've got different tools that we use to make sure that it makes it pretty loud for the players to. And we even worked that in training camp a little bit, understanding what we were prepping for, having this in the back of our minds that we needed to work different cadences and different things to make sure we were ready for this game. So it won't be the first time that they've had to deal with it. And the first time we did it, I made it pretty hard for them to hear, sometimes harder than it might actually be in the game. But I want the chaos to be crazy in practice so that they feel it. And then they get to the game, they're in a calming place. But it's going to be loud. It's going to be noisy. It's going to be rocking. It's a live crowd. They're great people, great fans. So it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I think also major challenge, obviously, the quarterback that you all are facing, John Matieri, was phenomenal at Washington State. He threw for almost 400 yards in week one. He's just a winner and does a lot of different things to keep defenses uncomfortable. So what's the key to getting him off rhythm and keeping him uncomfortable?
Yeah, I admire him. I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in college football. Obviously, the experience is huge for him playing last year at Washington State and having his coordinator, Coach Arbuckle, come. And you've seen the production that he's had at Washington State. You see the production that he's had at Oklahoma already. So it's a guy that you've got to be ready for at all phases. You got to be ready for him to sit there in the pocket and throw the football. You got to be ready for him in the RPO game. You got to be ready for him to get on the perimeter and throw it. You got to be ready for him to run it. So it's going to be a big challenge for our defense because of all the multiple things that he can do. And then he's got skill players that can play. You've got Deion Burks out there who's going to take a lot of pride in this game because he's from Michigan. And guys we've recruited, whether it be Logan Howell at tackle or Jared Kanak at tight end, we know we've recruited those guys, and they've got a lot of skill guys all over. So it's going to be a well-coached team that's going to come out with a lot of fire and a lot of motivated to win a big game. But so are we.
And I know you're laser focused on going out and winning this game, but big picture, you look at the fact that Michigan and Oklahoma have only played once, and that was in the 1976 Orange Bowl. What is this game, two blue buds, what does it mean for the sport and the moment in time that we're in, that you guys are going out there and playing a night game?
Yeah, I think it's awesome for the sport. It's a blessing to be able to be the head coach at Michigan and coach on the stage and coach against a program like Oklahoma. Obviously playing there, there's a lot of love for it and a lot of respect. And I think, Brent will probably say the same thing. Two blue blood programs playing in a night game on ABC on College Game Day. I mean, like, that's what college football is all about. College football is about these moments, about these games. So to be able to do that and, to go back to play at a place that you played, it's super special. It's awesome. But yeah, we're just really, really focused on the now and today and what we can do to get better. And but it's gonna be an awesome atmosphere.
Last couple of things, and then I'll let you get on with your day because I know you're a busy man. You've talked a lot about building this sort of we over me mentality and having it be about the team. In today's era, everything in our culture is pulling us to not have us think that way, and especially these guys. So how do you approach it? Like, how do you actually get all of those young men to buy into the overall selflessness that's key for what you want to do?
Yeah, I think it starts with the kids you recruit and the families you recruit in your program. Yeah, I think you have to weed out, and not to say there's bad kids or bad families, but there's families that just don't fit. There's kids that just don't fit here. So you got to figure out who are the fits for your program, who are the fits that you actually mesh well with you, your staff, and then the players that you have here. When we go through the recruiting process, it's a lot of our players telling us, like, yeah, that's, we like this guy, and the film's great, but if they're not a fit in the program, that's not good. And then it's just continual teaching of everyday life, of everything you do, doing everything the right way, whether it's lining up your water bottles, lining up your shoes, making sure the weights are put away, going to class, being a great citizen. Like, all those things include the team over me mentality, because at the end of the day, like, this is an 11-man sport. Like, you can't just be the only person out there. So whether it's off the field or on the field, you got to be all about the team. And the people that aren't, those are the ones that are failures. For us, we want to make sure that everybody on the team is bought into us. And, that's a great example of Bryce, on the block, is like a guy that has all this hype and all this thing. He's all team over me because he's willing to throw a block with somebody on 3rd and 3 in the red zone and not be mad that he didn't get to throw a touchdown there. So I think that's a prime example of, like, the culture we're trying to build here.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. Coach, thank you so much. I appreciate you being generous with your time and all of your insights, and we're obviously wishing you the best of luck this week in Norman. Enjoy the trip.
I appreciate it. Go Blue.
Tomorrow, a phenomenal women's soccer doubleheader coming your way when Michigan State hosts 5th-ranked Notre Dame. That is followed by 6th-ranked USC against number 1 Stanford. Live coverage begins at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific on the Big Ten Network, and as always on the Fox Sports app. Penn State opened its season with a blowout win over Nevada. Nittany Lions scored on their first 9 offensive drives, though they were held to field goals on 3 of their 7 red zone trips. It was Penn State's 32nd straight win against unranked teams, a streak that figures to continue this weekend. Florida International paying a visit to Beaver Stadium. And Jerry, big focus on the pass game. I mean, think about the last time that we had seen Penn State. Obviously, it was college football playoff semifinal against Notre Dame, and quite famously, they completed 0 passes to wide receivers. They had 16 completions to wide receivers in this game. I get it, different level of competition, but what did you think of Drew Aller in the pass game?
Yeah, 16 in this game when they averaged 6 a year ago. And as you mentioned, they didn't have 1 against Notre Dame in the semifinal. So I went back and I watched the tape of the devoted game, and I charted the passes, whether they were complete or incomplete. I just wanted to know how far they were thrown. And this isn't a complete analysis, but it's almost 11 yards, 15 yards, 17 yards, 23 yards. The longest pass they had was the 31-yard touchdown pass, but they were on the 31-yard line. My point is, last year, you watch their offense, they very rarely threw the ball downfield. And, James Franklin, we talked about this a little bit at media days, and we were talking about Drew Aller being better in the big games. And Coach Franklin made a great point. He said, you know what? We didn't have the receivers that make those back shoulder catches and where you can let a receiver go and just throw it in the area. But obviously they went in the portal and they got 3 of them. So that's where they're headed. They're headed where most of college football is when it comes to the pass game. Back shoulder, which used to be a bad pass, now it's a perfect pass. But you have to have a great receiving core to go up and make those plays. But if you're only throwing it 11 yards down the field, 15 yards down the field, 17 yards down the field, 23 yards down the field, you're not going to get those back shoulder throws. So it'll be interesting to see how this pass game evolves.
We'll get more of a sense of it coming up this weekend. And again, want to remind you, we've got the Penn State game on our air. And above and beyond that, we also have our tailgate show originating from State College. That comes your way at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. It is followed by Jerry and Rick Pizzo. Countdown to kickoff, taking you up to the game between the Nittany Lions and FIU. Again, that game is at noon Eastern Time here on the Big Ten Network. Countdown to kickoff, sponsored by Ace. Big Ten Tailgate, sponsored by Hellman's Mayonnaise. Let's get to Indiana. Curt Cignetti, never one to mince words, Jerry. I don't think he was thrilled with the performance against Old Dominion. They got Kennesaw State coming up this week. What are you looking for the Hoosiers to improve on here in week 2?
Yeah, Coach Cignetti not being thrilled about a win is right down his alley, right? I mean, you really never know if Coach Sig is happy or sad. He always looks like he might have heartburn either way if things are going well or if he's not satisfied. I'm in favor of this schedule, though. I mean, this is, and you and I talked about this last week, Reverend, this is a great schedule for Indiana. It's not going to prevent them from making the playoffs. It's not going to prevent them from continuing to build a program. But you watch the tape, and regardless of who you play, and you make the corrections, and you move on. I would say to you, my guess is Coach Cignetti, doesn't matter who they played last week, how good they were, how bad they were. We're going to watch the tape, we're going to make the corrections, and we're going to be better next week. And he'll say, the standard is the standard. We didn't live up to it, and we're going to have to live up to it this week. My guess is that's what's being said in the room.
And Kennesaw State played pretty well in its opener, 1-point loss to Wake Forest. They got Dexter Williams, former Indiana Hoosier, as their quarterback. So a little bit of a homecoming for Williams. Friday Night Football on the network features Maryland against Northern Illinois and Northwestern taking on Western Illinois. Coverage begins with the pregame show, 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Go to big10.org/BTN Game Finder for channel locations in your area. Let's talk about those two teams, Jerry, the two Big Ten teams, starting with the Terps. What were your takeaways from week 1 for Maryland?
It's hard to say to a team, we have to cut our penalties in half down to 50. I mean, they had 100 yards in penalties. And Coach Locks talks about this all the time, how they're sometimes their own worst enemies. So obviously that has to be addressed. I think the other thing that has to be addressed is the run game. Now, Malik Washington, I mean, we saw him in camp. I mean, this is a great get for them, and he's going to live up to all expectations. So he was 27 for 43, 3 touchdowns, no picks. The issue is they rushed for 112 yards. And at some point, when you get into conference play, to think that you could have that type of ratio is a little unrealistic for this reason. To throw for that many yards in a conference game, you have protection problems because you're playing against some of the best athletes in college football on the Big Ten defenses, and you have coverage issues trying to get free in some of the best secondaries in the country. So Coach Locks knows this. You got to stop the penalties, but they've got to run the ball better before they get to conference play.
Well, he talks a lot about Terps versus Terps. You're right, the 14 penalties will rankle him. But I was listening to his news conference yesterday. He was really proud of the fact that with a true freshman starting quarterback, no turnovers. So it's certainly something to build on there. What about Northwestern, Coach? It was not pretty for them. And, I was thinking about in the aftermath of the loss to Tulane, I was thinking a little bit about David Braun's first game as the head coach after that crazy summer with the dismissal of Pat Fitzgerald. They played Rutgers, and they absolutely got manhandled. and you thought, man, I don't know that they'll win a game. And they ended up winning 8 games, including beating Utah in a bowl game. So they're going to need to figure out a way to kind of channel what happened a couple years ago. How do they do that?
Yeah, I've been part of not pretty. And when it's not pretty, it's the coach's fault. And you have to take the full responsibility if you're David Braun in Tulane at the Tulane game. And then you have to move forward. You can't overreact. But, you can't watch college football without someone talking about, we have a great culture in our locker room, and our locker room's great. Everybody's bought in. Well, if that's true for Northwestern, this game this week is a game that they should win. If they fix what happened in New Orleans, this game should be a W, and nothing should be acceptable other than winning this week's game and rebounding from the Tulane game.
Yeah, Northwestern has had some problems with FCS teams in the past. They've lost 2 of their last 5 against FCS opponents, so we'll see whether or not they can get things going here against the Leathernecks, a Western Illinois team that lost 52-3 to Illinois last week. So if there is any chance on the schedule to bounce back, Jerry, particularly with Oregon looming next week and big noon kickoff coming in, this is the time to do it for the Wildcats. It's going to do it for us. We will see you for Big Ten today. Tomorrow, Jake Butt and Joel Klatt on the program. We'll see you then.